This is Andrew Jordan for another episode of Talmud for the Perplexed. I hope you're doing good today, and I wanted to remind you that if you enjoy this content, you should like and subscribe to the channel. You can also find me on Facebook and Twitter under the name A. Jordan, author, and you can follow my writing at www.drajordan.com, drajordan.com. Today I wanted to talk about one of the most famous episodes in the Talmud, which is the story of the oven of akhnai, which is found in the tractate Bava Metzia in the Talmud. Skipping around a little bit, but I was inspired to talk about this sugya, this portion of Talmud with you this morning. This portion of Talmud explains or demonstrates rather the principles of rabbinic Judaism in action. And the story begins with a discussion of a specific kind of oven that is not super important for the content of what comes after, but essentially there is a debate, a halakhic, a debate that erupts between Rabbi Eliezer ben Hyrcanus and the sages as a group over the purity status of the oven. That is the background. And essentially what happens is that Rabbi Eliezer is wanting to prove his point and begins to argue for his point in the manner that is supposed to be, how this is supposed to be done in rabbinic jurisprudence, which is through logical argumentation. And the sages, the rabbis, do not accept his argumentation. So this being the case, Rabbi Eliezer resorts to what we might call supernatural, miraculous, or even magical practice to convince the rabbis of his halakhic legal opinion. And the part that we want to look at starts with Rabbi Eliezer saying, if the halakha is in accordance with my opinion, this carob tree will prove it. So he's referring to a carob tree, which is a type of fruit from the Middle East. And the tree was uprooted from its place 100 cubits. And then the rabbi said to him, you do not cite halakhic proof. You're not allowed to prove a halakha from a carob tree. So what is the point of this? This is engaging with the manner in which argumentation is presented in rabbinic literature, which is not through miraculous deeds or magical practices. Before we proceed further, though, I think it's going to be important to take a brief side journey here and consider who is Rabbi Eliezer ben Hyrcanus. When did he live, and what is he known for in the rabbinic literature? And so he was a first century sage, as you can see on the screen, roughly living from perhaps 80 CE to 110 CE, active rather, living much longer than that, but active in the rabbinic community during that time. And he was known for a highly conservative viewpoint of the Torah and the approach of what legal approaches should be had with regard to the observance of halakha. So Rabbi Eliezer ben Hyrcanus is perhaps most well known for his charge, for him being charged with heresy, minut in Hebrew. So we'll look at that really quickly to get a background on Eliezer before proceeding in Bava Metzia. And we're going to head over to Avodah Zarah 16b, which is the tractate dealing with foreign worship, or perhaps known as idolatry. So in this story, we have the story of when Rabbi Eliezer was arrested and charged with heresy. And this is presumably before the episode that we're talking about in Bava Metzia. So the sages are telling a story about this incident, and Rabbi Eliezer was brought before the judges before the judge to go through his case, and the officer, the hegemon, which you can see up here in the where is it? Oh, here it is. Hegemon. You can see the Greek loanword from to describe the officer, officer of the court. So the officer. I'm not going to read it word for word, but there's a debate. The judge is essentially asking. He says, why are you engaged in matters of heresy, essentially? And the Rabbi Eliezer says the judge is trusted by me. And what he was referring to was God, of course, the judge. But the officer of the court, the hegemon, thought he was talking about himself, the judge, the earthly judge in this case. But he was actually referencing God, his Father in heaven, as it's referred to in the Talmud. So the officer of the court assumes that Rabbi Eliezer is trusting in him, so he's acquitted. And it says here in the Talmud, Dimus patur ata. Demos is a Greek loanword as well too. So you can see this is an interesting case of the prevalence of Greek loanwords in the Talmud. Probably here dealing with administrative language, which was the language of the day in Palestine for administrative tasks and government. So after that, Rabbi Eliezer goes to his students, and they come to console him because he must have been emotionally distressed after dealing with that court case. And one of his students, Rabbi Akiva, who is very important in terms of the development of Rabbinic Judaism, and is also one of the rabbis who proclaimed Bar Kokhba as the Messiah in the Bar Kokhba revolt. So Rabbi Akiva comes to console his teacher, Rabbi Eliezer, and asks him, was there perhaps a teacher or a heretic who taught something to you that you found pleasure in, or you enjoyed the teaching, more or less? And Rabbi Eliezer says, well, you know what, actually, Rabbi Akiva, that's actually true. I remember one time, a long time ago, I was walking in Sipori in the marketplace, and I saw a man named Yaakov of Kefar Sechania, who was a disciple of Jesus the Nazarene, Yeshu HaNotzri. And he said to me, isn't it written in your Torah, you shall not bring payment to a prostitute, referencing a verse in Deuteronomy 23:19, which in Sefaria we can click on and see over here. And Yaakov asked, what is the halakha? What is the practical legal observance that we have to do based off this verse in the Torah? And so he asks, is it permitted to make from the payment of a prostitute services rendered a bathroom for the high priest in the temple? So essentially, can you use this money to pay for things in the temple, the bathroom in the temple? Kind of play on the idea of the filthiness that's associated with the bathroom, and from a Jewish legal perspective, the filthiness associated with prostitution. And the Rabbi Eliezer didn't have a response. Yaakov says that Jesus the Nazarene, Yeshu HaNotzri, taught him the following halakha. And he says it is permitted, it's okay, you're allowed to do that. And the source text that he used is in Micah 1:7, and it says there, of a payment to a prostitute she has gathered them, and to the payment of a prostitute shall they return. You can see over here that's where it came from. And they have a slightly different translation of the text, but we can see that it is, so over here, if you're looking on the screen, you can see it starts right here in the Talmud, in the Talmud it starts there, and over here it is right here, ki me'etnan zona kibatsa ve'ad etnan zona yashubu. So it's talking down here from the, so they're from the payment that you give to prostitutes. Here in the GPS translation, it translates it as harlotry, just some older English word for the same thing. And let me go back here. I've lost my place in the Talmud. When I was clicking on it, it didn't like that. So let me just scroll back and find it here. Oh, here we go. So it's basically saying if you're paid to a prostitute, you can pay it to build the bathroom for the high priest. So if it comes from filth, you can return it to filth, basically. That's the teaching that he had from Jesus the Nazarene, Yeshua Nutzri. And Rabbi Eliezer liked this teaching. So that was the reason that he was arrested for heresy. And then there's some discussion afterwards, which is why this story was presented. And Rabbi Eliezer, he made a mistake. He transgressed the Torah, for he didn't do what he was supposed to do, and that's from Proverbs, Mishle, keep yourself away from her and do not come to the entrance of her house, which the rabbis are going to read here and interpret. And so they say, remove your way from her. This is a reference to heresy. So they're reading this as metaphorically, perhaps you could say, or midrashically, to refer to heresy. So you're supposed to separate yourself from heresy. And do not come near the entrance of her house. This is talking about the governing authorities. So you're supposed to kind of keep a safe distance from those things. So this story was read as a way of saying you need to distance yourself from heretics and their teaching, which was part of the rabbinic goal of separating themselves from the Ebionites, we could say, the Nazarenes, the Jewish Christians, even though that term is somewhat problematic. So we know then that Rabbi Eliezer has a reputation in the Talmud of this charge of heresy, which is something to keep in the back of our minds, and important, I think, when we get to reading the story of the oven of Akhnai. So we saw in a previous tractate of Talmud that we were studying that there was a debate between a Jewish heretic Christian who was discussing a matter of scriptural interpretation with one of the rabbis. And we know that the Jewish Christians, I'm using that term even though it's somewhat problematic, but it's the best term that is commonly and widely accepted, that the Jewish Christians did not have the rabbinical system of interpretation, which led to a difference of interpretation. So we're going to go back over here to the story of the oven of Akhnai and see Rabbi Eliezer use non-rabbinically approved ways of interpreting or proving his point. So back to this, he's trying to use a sign to essentially prove that his position is correct. And so after the karob tree, he tries again. He says, okay, if the halakha is accordance to my opinion, if I'm right, then the stream will prove it. The water in the stream turned backwards and started flowing the other way. And then the rabbis say, well, no, you can't do that. You can't prove halakha, your opinion, from a stream. So you can't use any of these magical ways that you're trying to do to prove that you're right. Rabbi Eliezer comes back and he says, okay, well, if I'm right, then the study hall, the walls of where we're studying right now, they're going to lean forward, but they're not, and they're going to kind of start to fall. And then, there's some more debate where they basically say you can't do that, And then Rabbi Eliezer comes back with probably the ultimate proof. He says, okay, well, if I'm right, then God is going to prove it. Heaven will prove it. A divine voice, a bat kol, a prophetic voice emerged from heaven and says to the rabbis, why are you differing with Rabbi Eliezer, as the halakha is in accordance with his opinion? So this is saying even God himself comes down and says that Rabbi Eliezer is correct. This is the halakha. This is what they should do. His opinion about the purity status. It's his opinion that's correct and not the rabbis. Even though the rabbis argued according to their own methodology, their own system of logical reasoning. But Rabbi Eliezer is using signs and wonders, as we might hear from biblical translations. And even God himself says this is the correct way. Rabbi Eliezer is correct. But Rabbi Yehoshua, and we can see that he was around the same time, and he was the kind of a opponent, more or less maybe, of Rabbi Eliezer. also around the time of Yochanan ben Zakkai, Rabban Gamaliel, some of the earlier rabbis. He says, he quotes a biblical verse from Deuteronomy 30:12. It is not in heaven. And we can see it is not in the heavens that you should say, who among us can go up to the heavens and get it for us to impart to us that we may observe it, referring to the Torah. So he says, well, hold on a second. It says in the Torah that it is not in heaven. So what does that mean? It means that the Torah was given to Moses at Mount Sinai, and then through that giving of the Torah, it was given to the judges and to the rabbis through derivation to interpret. As it says that you should listen to the judges in your own time in the Torah. And the rabbis say, well, okay, Rabbi Yirmiyah says, this is a later Babylonian rabbi, not a contemporary of Eliezer. So this is a later portion of Talmud that says that the Torah was given at Mount Sinai. We do not listen to a divine voice. We don't listen to prophetic voices because it says in the Torah that you're supposed to listen to the majority. After a majority incline in Exodus 23:2. So in the full verse says, you shall not neither side with the mighty to do wrong. You shall not give a perverse testimony in a dispute so as to pervert it in favor of the mighty. So it's saying you have to follow the majority opinion. And since the rabbis, the majority of them disagree with Rabbi Eliezer, he's not correct, even if God himself agrees with Rabbi Eliezer. And so that was the point here. And I read this text as basically a rabbinic commentary on Christianity. And specifically when the rabbis are dealing with Christianity, they're talking about Ebionites, the sect behind the Pseudo-Clementine literature, the Nazarenes, Jewish Christians, quote unquote. And they're saying that they're disagreeing with the methodology. They're saying that the Jewish Christians are using miraculous signs to prove their points, but they're not relying on the system of jurisprudence that was established in the Torah, which is to go after majority opinion and to listen to the judges in your own time. So at the end of the sugya, the rabbis conclude, and they mention a story where Rabbi Natan, who is a little bit later than Eliezer in Babylonia, and he finds Elijah, and he says Elijah, and he says to him, "What did the Holy One, blessed be He, do at that time when this episode occurred?" And Elijah said to him, "The Holy One, blessed be He, smiled and said, 'My children have triumphed over me. My children have triumphed over me.'" So he was kind of amused, but also, and you can read it in many different ways. I kind of see it as a proud moment that this is what he wanted to be happen, that God wanted the Jewish people to rely on a logical reasoning, and in a certain sense, I'm seeing this kind of carefully, but in a certain kind of democratic process, going after majority opinion. Now the rabbinic system is not actually democracy, but it has democratic components in it. And so then after this episode, the sages brought all the things that Rabbi Eliezer deemed to be pure, and they burned it in the fire, because basically they're saying that all of his decisions were incorrect because he was not relying on the correct methodology, and he was not doing this in the way that he was supposed to. So his decisions were incorrect, and they needed to basically destroy the things that he considered pure because they were now impure. And so after this, it goes on, and we see some interactions between Rabbi Akiva, who is the student of Rabbi Eliezer, and they go to interact with each other after this episode. But I don't think we will. I think we will stop there. Just because this is a nice place to stop, and I think that this episode, this sugya, this passage in the Talmud, really indicates how the system of rabbinic logical reasoning functions, and how the rabbis reject miraculous proving of points. So you can't prove your point by pointing to a prophecy or a dream or a miracle that you saw or anything like that. That's not part of the rabbinic system. That's not how decisions are made. It needs to follow the proper protocol, and it needs to be decided by the majority opinion of rabbis through logical reasoning, presenting of arguments and sources, and that kind of thing. And this is the point of Rabbinic Judaism, how it differs from Christianity, in that it rejects this line of using the prophetic and the miraculous to prove religious truth. And so that is the all that we have for today. To stay tuned for further episodes of Talking Torah, Talmud for the Perplexed, and other episodes from this channel. If you enjoyed the content, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel, and check me out on Facebook and Twitter. Have a nice day.